My son and my ex-wife left me stranded at a foreign airport with $12. I'm Charles Wilson, and my ex-wife Margaret just made the most expensive mistake of her life. 3 hours ago, she and my son Daniel abandoned me at Paris airport, laughing as they boarded their first-class flight home. They called me worthless, said I was an embarrassment to the family, told everyone within earshot that I deserved to be left behind because I couldn't even afford my own ticket. What they didn't know was that a private detective was recording everything. What they didn't know was that my 94-year-old grandfather owns a $340 million empire. And what they definitely didn't know was that their cruel little stunt just triggered an inheritance clause that would strip them of everything. In 72 hours, Margaret and Daniel went from expecting $51 million to having absolutely nothing. And it all started with one phone call I made while watching their plane disappear into the sky. If you've ever been underestimated by your own family, you're going to want to hear this story. Hit subscribe because what happened next proves that sometimes the quiet ones hold all the power. The revenge was perfect. The justice was permanent. And they never saw it coming. For 3 years after our divorce, Margaret Johnson and my son Daniel had perfected the art of making me feel worthless. It started small. Daniel stopped calling me Dad when he turned 23. Just stopped. At family gatherings, he'd introduce me to his friends as Charles. Not my father Charles, just Charles, like I was some random guy his mother knew. Margaret made sure everyone understood my place in the world. At Daniel's college graduation party, she pulled me aside in front of her new boyfriend's friends. "You're embarrassing us again," she said, loud enough for others to hear. "That Target polo shirt, really, Charles?" "It's clean," I said. "It's $12. I can see the tag." The truth was, I lived in a 450-square-foot studio apartment. Rent was $1,200 a month. I drove a 2018 Toyota Camry with 89,000 miles on it. Silver, nothing fancy. Margaret lived in a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs. She drove a Mercedes GLE 450. Lease payment, $890 a month. She reminded me of this whenever possible. "I don't understand how you can show up places looking like that," she'd say. "Don't you have any pride?" But the moment that really showed me where I stood happened 6 months ago. We were at a restaurant. One of those forced family dinners Margaret insisted on, for Daniel's sake. Daniel was scrolling through his phone, AirPods in. He did this now, constantly. "Daniel," I said, "can we talk? Just us?" He didn't look up. "About what?" "About us, about being father and son." Now he looked up, but not at me. At Margaret. "Mom," he said, "do I have to deal with this?" Margaret sipped her wine. A $40 bottle she'd ordered specifically to make a point about who could afford what. "Charles," she said, "he's an adult. He doesn't owe you a relationship. I'm his father." "Are you?" Daniel said. "Because fathers usually, provide things, support their families. You can't even afford your own plane ticket." The restaurant went quiet around us. Other diners were listening now. "I've been supporting myself just fine," I said. "Have you?" Margaret laughed. "Charles, you live in a studio apartment. You shop at Target. You drive a car with almost 90,000 miles on it. Those things don't define—" "They define everything," Daniel interrupted. "Mom's boyfriend has a house in the Hamptons. He's taking us to Europe next month. First class." "That's nice," I said. "You've never taken me anywhere first class," Daniel said. "You've never taken me anywhere, period." Margaret leaned forward. "Daniel, your father can't afford to take you to McDonald's, let alone Europe." The waiter appeared. Young kid, probably 22. He could sense the tension. "Is everything okay here?" he asked. "Everything's fine," Margaret said. "We're just explaining to Charles here that some people earn their place at the table and others—" She gestured at me. "Others just show up hoping someone else will pay." I reached for my wallet, pulled out 2 20s, all I had. "This should cover my share," I said. Daniel laughed, actually laughed. $40, he said. "Mom's bottle of wine cost more than that." I stood up. "I'll see you both later." "Will you, though?" Margaret called after me. "Because honestly, Charles, what's the point? You add nothing to these dinners. You add nothing to Daniel's life. You're just there, taking up space." I walked out. Drove home in my 89,000-mile Camry. Sat in my 450-square-foot apartment. And I thought about my grandfather, Harold Wilson, 94 years old, the man who built Wilson Steel Industries from nothing, the man who'd been watching everything, the man who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. What you have to understand is that I was losing my son, not just his respect. I'd lost that years ago. I was losing any chance of a relationship with him at all. After that restaurant humiliation, Daniel stopped returning my calls completely. Before, he'd at least text back eventually. Short answers. Yeah. Okay. Whatever. But something. Now, nothing. Margaret made sure I understood this was permanent. She called me 2 weeks later, Tuesday morning. I was having coffee in my studio apartment, looking out at the parking lot where my Camry sat between a rusted pickup truck and a Honda with a dented bumper. "Charles," she said, "we need to talk." "About what?" "About boundaries. About what's appropriate going forward." I knew that tone. Margaret used it when she was about to deliver what she considered a final decision. "Daniel doesn't want you calling him anymore," she said. "He told you that?" "He told me he's tired of feeling guilty every time your name shows up on his phone. He says it's like getting a reminder that he's related to failure." Those words hit me like a physical blow. Failure. My own son saw me as failure. "Margaret," I said, "he's my son. Biologically, yes. But Charles, what are you actually contributing to his life? What value are you adding?" "I'm his father." "Being a father is more than just existing," she said. "It's about providing, protecting, being someone your child can look up to. Can you honestly say Daniel looks up to you?" I couldn't answer that, because we both knew the truth. "I'm trying to do what's best for everyone," Margaret continued, "including you. Don't you think it would be easier if you just let go? Stop trying to force a relationship that clearly isn't working? I love him. I know you do. But sometimes love means stepping aside, letting him have the life he deserves without constantly being reminded of limitations." She meant my limitations. My studio apartment, my Target shirts, my inability to take him anywhere first class. "What are you saying exactly?" I asked. "I'm saying maybe it's time to accept reality. Daniel is 26. He's building a life with people who can actually support his dreams. My boyfriend is talking about helping him start his own business. Real money, Charles. Not whatever you're able to scrape together." "And where do I fit in that?" "You don't," she said. "That's what I'm trying to tell you. You don't fit. And that's not anyone's fault. It's just how things are." The line went quiet for a long moment. "So what you're saying," I said slowly, "is that I should give up my relationship with my son because I'm not rich enough to deserve one. I'm saying you should stop making everyone uncomfortable with your presence. Stop making Daniel feel guilty for having opportunities you can't provide. And if I don't, then we'll have to make harder boundaries," she said. "Legal ones if necessary. Legal boundaries." She was threatening to get lawyers involved to keep me away from my own son. "Margaret," I said, "do you remember what you said when we got married? About family always coming first?" "That was a long time ago, Charles, before I understood what family actually means." "What does it mean?" "It means people who build each other up, people who contribute, people who add value instead of just needing things all the time. I don't need things from you. You need acceptance. You need to feel important. You need Daniel to call you dad and pretend like you're someone worth respecting. Those are needs, Charles. And they're needs we can't meet anymore." After she hung up, I sat in my apartment for 3 hours. Just sat there, thinking about what I was losing. If I stayed quiet, if I accepted their judgment, I would lose my son forever. Daniel would go on with his life, building businesses with Margaret's boyfriend's money, taking first-class trips to Europe, living in houses in the Hamptons, and I would become a memory. Eventually, he'd tell people he didn't really have a father, or that his father died young. Anything would be better than admitting his father lived in a studio apartment and shopped at Target. But there was something Margaret didn't know, something Daniel didn't know, something that would change everything. My grandfather Harold Wilson hadn't just been watching their behavior toward me, he'd been documenting it. Through a private detective I didn't even know existed, and he'd been waiting for them to show their true character. The call from Margaret was the final piece of evidence he needed. The trip to Paris was Margaret's idea, or at least, that's what she told me. "Charles," she said when she called in September, "Daniel and I are going to Paris for a long weekend. There's a business conference there that could be really good for his career." "That's great," I said. "The thing is, the conference organizers specifically requested that attendees bring family members, something about authentic networking opportunities." I didn't understand why she was telling me this. So Daniel needs to bring a father figure, she continued. And since my boyfriend can't make it that weekend. You want me to come to Paris? I want you to come and act like a normal father for 3 days. Can you do that? I should have known something was wrong. Margaret hadn't voluntarily included me in anything for 3 years, but the chance to spend time with Daniel, to maybe rebuild something. I'll pay my own way, I said. You can't afford your own way, Charles. The conference is covering accommodations for family members. You just need to get yourself there. I used my credit card. The flight cost $1,147, more than my monthly rent. But it was Daniel. It was a chance. We met at Charles de Gaulle Airport on October 12th, Terminal 2, E. I found them at Gate 42 in the Air France departure lounge. Margaret was wearing a designer suit, something that probably cost more than I made in a month. Daniel had on AirPods, scrolling through his phone like always. Charles, Margaret said when she saw me, you made it. Wouldn't miss it, I said. Daniel looked up from his phone, looked at my clothes. Navy blue polo shirt from Target, khaki pants from the same place, white sneakers I'd bought 3 years ago. Dad, he said, but the way he said it sounded like he was testing the word, like he wasn't sure it still applied. The first sign something was wrong came at baggage claim. Margaret and Daniel both had matching Louis Vuitton luggage, the kind of set that costs $8,500. I had a black duffel bag I'd bought at Walmart. Jesus, Charles, Margaret muttered. Could you try to look like you belong somewhere nice? It's just a bag, I said. It's never just anything with you, Daniel said. It's always just a shirt, just a car, just a bag, just poverty. That word hung in the air between us. Poverty. We took a taxi to the hotel, the Ritz-Carlton, Paris. Margaret had booked a suite, room 1205, $3,200 per night. How are you paying for this? I asked. That's not your concern, Margaret said. Your concern is acting like you deserve to be here. The conference turned out to be smaller than I'd expected. Maybe 50 people in a hotel ballroom. Daniel networked aggressively, working the room like he'd been doing it for years. I tried to follow. Tried to engage in conversations about business opportunities and investment strategies. But every time I opened my mouth, Margaret would find a way to redirect attention away from me. Charles works in, well, he's between opportunities right now, she'd say. Or, my ex-husband is more of a observer than a participant in these kinds of discussions. By the second day, I realized what was happening. I wasn't there to help Daniel network. I was there to be a prop, the father figure who existed just enough to check a box, but who should otherwise remain invisible. The breaking point came on our last day, October 14th. We were supposed to fly back together that evening. Same flight, but at lunch Margaret pulled out 3 boarding passes. Change of plans, she said. She slid 2 passes across the table, hers and Daniel's, first class. What about mine? I asked. Your flight is tomorrow, she said. Middle seat, coach, red eye. Why? Because Daniel and I need to get back early. We have plans tomorrow night. Important plans. What kind of plans? The kind that don't include you, Daniel said without looking up from his phone. I don't understand. Margaret leaned forward. Charles, this whole trip has been painful for everyone. You don't fit with these people. You don't understand their conversations. You make everyone uncomfortable. I haven't said anything wrong. You don't have to say anything wrong. You just have to exist. Standing there in your Target shirt, pulling out your Walmart bag, trying to pretend you belong in a world that costs more than you make in a year. So you're abandoning me? We're giving you time to figure out how to get home on your own, Daniel said, like an adult. I don't have money for an extra night in this hotel. That sounds like a you problem, Margaret said. She stood up. Daniel followed. They left me sitting at the restaurant table with a check for 137 euros. An hour later, I found them at the airport, Gate 42, about to board their first-class flight home. Margaret, I said, please, don't do this. Do what? She said loudly, loud enough for other passengers to hear. Ask you to take responsibility for yourself for once? I'm your family. Are you? Daniel said, because family usually supports each other. Family usually contributes something. You're not our responsibility anymore, Charles, Margaret announced to anyone listening. Good luck getting home without money. They walked onto the plane, left me standing at the gate. The other passengers stared. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked embarrassed for me. I stood there for a long moment, processing what had just happened. Then I pulled out my phone and made one call. Patricia, I said when she answered, it's time to execute the codicil. Patricia Stevens had been the Wilson family attorney for 25 years. She'd drawn up my parents' wills. She'd handled my grandfather's business acquisitions. She'd been waiting for this phone call for 6 months. Charles, she said, are you certain about this? I was standing in Terminal 2E, watching Margaret and Daniel's plane taxi toward the runway. I'm certain, I said. You understand this is irreversible? Once we file the amended codicil, there's no going back. They just left me stranded in a foreign country without money, I said. I'd say we're past the point of going back. Your grandfather will want to hear the details. Everything that happened. He'll have the details. Morrison's been recording everything. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Morrison caught the abandonment on camera? He was in the VIP lounge. Harold wanted visual proof if they actually went through with it. And they did. They announced it to a gate full of strangers, made it as public and humiliating as possible. I could hear Patricia typing in the background. She was already preparing the paperwork. Charles, she said, I need you to understand what this means. The original will gave Margaret and Daniel $51 million, split between them. Daniel's share was supposed to set him up for life. I know. The amended codicil gives them nothing. Zero. Everything goes to you. $340 million. $340 million. Wilson Steel Industries. The foundation. All of it. I sat down in an airport chair. The magnitude of what was happening was starting to hit me. What about the house? I asked. Margaret's house. It's financed through a Wilson family trust. She'll have 30 days to vacate once the will is filed. And Daniel's trust fund? Frozen immediately. He'll get whatever's in his checking account, nothing more. A family walked past me. Father, mother, 2 kids. The father was carrying his daughter's backpack along with his own luggage. The mother was helping their son tie his shoes. They looked like they actually cared about each other. Patricia, I said, how long has my grandfather been planning this? Planning what specifically? This test, this whole situation. Harold first mentioned the abandonment clause 2 years ago, right after your divorce was finalized. He said he wanted to see Margaret and Daniel's true character under pressure. So this trip. The business conference was real, but Harold made sure Margaret knew about it, made sure she knew they were looking for families to attend. He suspected she'd find a way to use you and then discard you. He suspected correctly. Harold knows people, Charles. He built a $340 million company by understanding human nature. He said Margaret would show her true colors if she thought no one important was watching. But someone was watching. Morrison's been documenting everything for 6 months. Every conversation, every humiliation, every time they treated you like you were worthless. I thought about all those moments. The restaurant dinner, where Daniel refused to call me Dad. Margaret's comments about my clothes, my car, my apartment. The phone call where she told me to step aside and let them live their lives without me. They were never just being cruel, I said. They were building a case against themselves. Exactly. And Harold wanted enough evidence that no one could question his decision. When does this become official? I'm filing the amended will tomorrow morning. Paris time. It'll be official by noon. And when will they find out? Harold wants to tell them himself. At the Wilson Foundation Gala, Saturday night, the Wilson Foundation Gala. I'd completely forgotten. Every year, Harold hosted 500 of the most influential people in Pittsburgh. Business leaders, politicians, philanthropists, everyone who mattered in Margaret's social circle. He's going to announce it publicly? He's going to announce that you're taking over as chairman of the Wilson Foundation, that you'll be managing the family's charitable giving, $340 million worth of charitable giving. In front of everyone Margaret knows. In front of everyone Margaret has been trying to impress for the past 3 years. I closed my eyes. I could picture it. Margaret in her designer gown, working the room, telling people about Daniel's bright future and her new life. And then Harold taking the stage. Patricia, I said, what about after? After Saturday night? What do you mean? Will they try to contest this? Fight the will? They can try, but Harold's been careful. The abandonment clause is ironclad. They triggered it through their own actions with witnesses present. Morrison has everything documented. So it's over. It's over. Charles, you need to prepare yourself. After Saturday, you're going to be one of the wealthiest men in Pennsylvania, and Margaret and Daniel are going to have nothing. Nothing except what they've earned themselves, which, based on the past 3 years, isn't much. I hung up and looked around the airport. Families everywhere, people taking care of each other, people who understood what family actually meant. In 48 hours, everything would change. But first, I had to get home. Getting home turned out to be easier than I'd expected. Patricia had already wired money to my account by the time I reached the hotel. Enough for another night at the Ritz-Carlton if I wanted it. I didn't want it. Instead, I booked a room at a modest hotel near the airport. €60 per night. I wanted time to think before I returned to Pittsburgh. Time to prepare for what was coming. But Margaret and Daniel had other plans. They must have realized they'd left me without a way to contact them, because Daniel called me Thursday evening. "Charles," he said, "we need to talk." "About what?" "About what happened at the airport. Mom thinks maybe we were too harsh." This was interesting. Margaret thought they were too harsh. Margaret, who'd spent 3 years perfecting the art of humiliation. "Too harsh how?" I asked. "Look, can you meet us at the hotel tomorrow before we fly back? Mom wants to clear the air." "What hotel?" "We extended our stay. Room 1205, the Ritz-Carlton." Of course they did. They extended their stay at $3,200 per night. Well, they thought I was sleeping in the airport. "Why?" I asked. "Why what?" "Why do you want to clear the air now? Yesterday you told me I wasn't your responsibility." "People say things when they're stressed," Daniel said. "When they're trying to navigate complicated social situations." Complicated social situations, that's what he called abandoning your father in a foreign country. "What time?" I asked. "Noon. Meet us in the lobby." I arrived at 11:55. Margaret and Daniel were already there, sitting in leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's cars. Margaret was wearing a different designer outfit. This one looked like it cost even more than yesterday's. Daniel still had his AirPods in. "Charles," Margaret said as I approached, "thank you for coming." Daniel said you wanted to clear the air. "I did. I do." She gestured to a chair across from them. "Please sit." I sat. Margaret looked around the lobby, making sure other guests could hear our conversation. "Charles," she said, "I want you to know that what happened yesterday wasn't personal." It felt pretty personal. "It was practical," Daniel said. "We had commitments back home, important commitments." "More important than making sure your father got home safely?" "Charles," Margaret interrupted, "let's be honest about what you are to us now. You're not really Daniel's father in any meaningful sense. You're a biological connection. That's all." The words hit harder than I'd expected. Even after everything, part of me had hoped, "A biological connection," I repeated. "Yes, Daniel has real mentors now. People who can actually guide his career. People with resources and connections. People like your boyfriend. People like my fiancé, yes." Fiancé. This was news. "Congratulations," I said. "Thank you. Richard proposed last month. He's wonderful. Really successful. He owns 3 businesses and a house in the Hamptons." "I'm happy for you." "Are you?" Daniel said. "Because you don't sound happy. You sound bitter." "I'm not bitter. You sound like someone who's jealous of people who've actually made something of themselves," Margaret said. Other guests were listening now. A couple at the next table. A businessman reading a newspaper. The concierge behind the desk. "I'm not jealous," I said. "Really?" Margaret's voice was getting louder. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're jealous of people who can afford to stay in places like this. People who don't have to worry about plane tickets and hotel rooms." "Margaret, please keep your voice down." "Why? Because you're embarrassed? You should be embarrassed, Charles. Look around you." She gestured at the opulent lobby. "This is what success looks like. This is what happens when people work hard and make smart decisions." "And what I am is what happens when people don't?" "Exactly." The businessman with the newspaper looked up. The couple at the next table had stopped pretending not to listen. "Charles," Daniel said, "we're trying to help you understand reality here. You're 51 years old. You live in a studio apartment. You drive a car that's almost 10 years old. You shop at Target." "Those are facts," I said. "Those are failures," Margaret said. "And we can't keep pretending they're not. We can't keep including you in our lives and pretending like you belong." "So what are you saying?" "We're saying this is goodbye," Daniel said. "For real this time. No more phone calls. No more forced family dinners. No more this." He gestured at me like I was something distasteful. "You're cutting me off completely." We're setting boundaries with someone who's been a drain on our energy for years, Margaret said. We're choosing to surround ourselves with people who add value to our lives. And I don't add value. Charles, what value could you possibly add? What do you bring to the table? What can you offer Daniel that he can't get from people who've actually succeeded in life? The lobby had gone quiet. Everyone was listening to this public execution of whatever was left of our family relationship. I love him, I said. Love isn't enough, Daniel said. Love doesn't pay for college. Love doesn't open doors. Love doesn't get you invited to the right parties or introduced to the right people. Love is supposed to be unconditional. Nothing is unconditional, Margaret said. Everything has conditions, and the condition for being part of our lives is bringing something to the table, anything to the table. And I bring nothing. You bring nothing, she confirmed. You're a 51-year-old man with nothing to show for your life, and we're tired of pretending that's okay. I stood up. I understand. Do you? Margaret asked. Because I want to be very clear, this isn't temporary. This isn't us being angry. This is permanent. After today, we're not going to pretend we're a family anymore. I understand, I said again. Good. Then we're done here. I walked toward the lobby exit. Behind me, I could hear Margaret talking to Daniel. That went better than I expected, she said. He took it pretty well. Yeah, Daniel said. Maybe now we can finally move on with our lives. They had no idea that in 24 hours, their lives would be completely destroyed. They had no idea that Harold Wilson was already in Paris. They had no idea that the Wilson Foundation Gala was about to become the most expensive lesson in character they would ever receive. The Wilson Foundation Gala happened every October at the Ritz-Carlton, Paris. Harold Wilson had been hosting it there for 15 years. 500 of the most influential people in Pittsburgh flew to Paris for one night. Business leaders, politicians, philanthropists, anyone who mattered. Margaret and Daniel had no idea they were about to attend their own social execution. Saturday evening, October 17th. I arrived at the hotel at 6:30, 90 minutes before the gala began. I was wearing a tuxedo that Patricia had arranged to be delivered to my room. Tom Ford, probably worth more than my monthly rent. Patricia met me in the lobby. She was carrying a leather briefcase. Everything's ready, she said. The paperwork was filed this morning. As of noon Paris time, you are the sole heir to the Wilson estate. And Margaret and Daniel? They're upstairs getting ready. They have no idea what's about to happen. Where's Harold? Presidential suite. He's been watching everything through Morrison's surveillance footage. He wanted to see their behavior at the hotel yesterday. And he said it exceeded even his worst expectations. The way they talked to you in public, the way they dismissed you. Patricia shook her head. He's not a man who angers easily, but what he saw on that recording made him furious. We took the elevator to the presidential suite. Harold Wilson was standing by the window, looking out at the Paris skyline. At 94, he was still an imposing figure. 6 feet tall, silver hair, sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Grandfather," I said. He turned around, studied me for a long moment. "Charles," he said finally, "tell me exactly what they said when they left you at the airport." I repeated Margaret's words. Good luck getting home without money. Daniel's comment about family supporting each other, the way they announced it to strangers. Harold's jaw tightened. And yesterday, at the hotel, they told me I was just a biological connection, that I bring nothing to the table, that they're cutting me off permanently, in front of witnesses. The entire lobby heard it. Harold nodded. Morrison recorded both incidents. We have everything documented. He walked to his desk, picked up a document. The amended will. "Charles," he said, "do you understand what this means? You're about to inherit $340 million. You're about to become chairman of the Wilson Foundation. You'll control one of the largest charitable organizations in Pennsylvania." I understand. And Margaret and Daniel are about to lose everything, not just the inheritance. Margaret's house is financed through a Wilson family trust. Daniel's trust fund, his college payments, his car, everything is connected to this estate. They'll have nothing? They'll have whatever they've earned on their own merits, which as far as I can tell is very little. Patricia opened her briefcase. The foundation board is meeting in 10 minutes. They need to formally approve your appointment as chairman. All 12 members are here? All 12. They've been briefed on the situation. They're fully supportive. Harold picked up his cane. It's time. The foundation board meeting lasted exactly 15 minutes. 12 of Pittsburgh's most respected business leaders unanimously approved my appointment as chairman. The paperwork was signed, sealed, done. By the time we returned to the presidential suite, the gala was beginning. "Charles," Harold said, "I want you to understand something. What's about to happen isn't just about money. It's about character. Margaret and Daniel have shown who they really are. They've shown that their love is conditional on wealth and status. I know. But you've shown something else. You've shown dignity under pressure. You've shown grace in the face of humiliation. You've shown that you understand what family actually means." "Harold," Patricia interrupted, "we should go downstairs. The guests are arriving." Harold nodded. "Charles, are you ready for this?" I thought about the past 3 years. Every humiliation, every dismissal, every time they made me feel worthless. I'm ready. The ballroom was spectacular. Crystal chandeliers, gold table settings, 500 people in formal wear, networking and laughing over champagne that cost more per bottle than I used to make in a week. I spotted Margaret and Daniel immediately. Margaret was wearing a stunning black gown, working the room like she owned it. Daniel was in a perfect tuxedo, charming everyone he met. They had no idea they were about to lose everything. Harold took the stage at 9 o'clock. The room went quiet. When Harold Wilson spoke, people listened. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "thank you for joining us at the 15th Annual Wilson Foundation Gala. As you know, this foundation has given away over $200 million to charitable causes across Pennsylvania." Applause. Margaret was clapping enthusiastically. She loved being associated with this kind of philanthropy. "Tonight," Harold continued, "I have an important announcement about the future leadership of the Wilson Foundation." More applause. Margaret straightened up. She probably thought this was about Daniel getting some kind of role. For the past 6 months, I've been conducting what you might call a character assessment, testing the values and integrity of potential foundation leaders. The room was completely silent now. I'm pleased to announce that my grandson, Charles Wilson, has demonstrated the kind of character and dignity that the Wilson Foundation requires in its leadership. Harold gestured toward me. I stood up. Every eye in the room was on me. Charles will be taking over as chairman of the Wilson Foundation, effective immediately. He will also be inheriting control of Wilson Steel Industries and the entire Wilson family estate. The applause was polite but confused. People were trying to process what they'd just heard. I saw Margaret's face. Confusion, then recognition, then horror. "Some of you may be wondering about other members of the Wilson family," Harold continued. "I'm afraid Margaret Johnson and Daniel Johnson have demonstrated through their recent actions that they do not possess the character necessary for foundation leadership." Margaret went white. Daniel looked like he'd been struck by lightning. "In fact," Harold said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom, "their behavior toward Charles over the past week has been so egregious that they have forfeited any claim to the Wilson family inheritance." Now the room was buzzing. 500 people turning to look at Margaret and Daniel, who were standing frozen in the middle of the ballroom. I have video documentation of their abandonment of Charles at Charles de Gaulle Airport. I have recordings of their public humiliation of him in this very hotel, and I have witness testimony of their repeated assertions that family loyalty should be conditional on wealth and status. Margaret tried to speak. No sound came out. "Effective immediately," Harold continued. "Margaret Johnson and Daniel Johnson are no longer beneficiaries of the Wilson estate. They are no longer welcome at Wilson Foundation events, and they are no longer considered members of the Wilson family." The silence in the ballroom was deafening. 500 of Pittsburgh's elites staring at Margaret and Daniel, who stood paralyzed in the center of the room. Harold wasn't finished. "I want everyone here to understand something about character," he said. "True character is revealed not in prosperity but in adversity, not when times are easy, but when they're difficult. Margaret and Daniel failed that test completely." He pressed a button on the podium. A large screen descended from the ceiling. "I'd like you to see exactly what I mean." The video began playing. Airport security footage from Charles de Gaulle. Margaret and Daniel walking away from me at Gate 42. Audio of Margaret shouting, "Good luck getting home without money." The contempt in Daniel's voice as he said, "You're not our responsibility anymore." 500 people watched in stunned silence as my own family abandoned me in a foreign country. The video switched to hotel security footage, the lobby conversation from yesterday, Margaret's voice echoing through the ballroom speakers. "You're a 51-year-old man with nothing to show for your life, and we're tired of pretending that's okay." When the video ended, the silence stretched for what felt like forever. Then Harold spoke again. "Ladies and gentlemen, Charles Wilson, your new foundation chairman." The applause was thunderous, not just polite charity gala clapping, real applause. These people understood what they'd just witnessed. They'd seen cruelty exposed and justice served. I stood up and walked to the stage. Behind me, I could hear Margaret finally finding her voice. "Harold, wait," she called out. "Please, let me explain." But Harold was already walking off the stage, past her, without acknowledgement. Daniel tried to follow him. "Mr. Wilson, sir, there's been a misunderstanding." Harold stopped, turned around, looked at Daniel with complete coldness. "Son," he said, "the only misunderstanding here was mine. I misunderstood your character for 26 years. Margaret was crying now. Actual tears, running down her face, ruining her makeup. "This isn't fair," she said to anyone who would listen. "You don't understand the whole situation." But no one was listening. 500 people were politely avoiding eye contact, creating distance, making it clear that Margaret and Daniel were no longer welcome in their social circle. Patricia appeared at my side. "Charles," she said quietly, "there's one more thing Harold wants you to see." She handed me a document. A bank statement. Wilson Steel Industries. Current liquid assets, $340,612,437. All of it now mine. "Also," Patricia continued, "Margaret's house goes into foreclosure Monday morning. The trust funding Daniel's lifestyle ends at midnight tonight." I looked across the ballroom. Margaret and Daniel were standing alone now, everyone having moved away from them. Margaret was still crying. Daniel was staring at his phone like he was trying to call someone who could fix this. They couldn't fix this. This was permanent. The legal formalities were simple, clean, exactly what you'd expect from lawyers who'd been planning this for 6 months. Patricia handed me the final documents to sign. We were in Harold's presidential suite, 10 minutes after the gala revelation. The sounds of the party continued below, but our business was nearly finished. "This is the transfer of Wilson Steel Industries," Patricia said, pointing to the first signature line. $340 million in assets, I signed. "This is your appointment as chairman of the Wilson Foundation. You'll control all charitable giving, approximately $15 million per year in donations." I signed. "This is the deed transfer for the family estate in Pittsburgh. 15 bedrooms, 43 acres, valued at $12 million. I signed. "And this," she said, sliding the final document across the table, "is the eviction notice for Margaret's house. She has 30 days. I hesitated on this one. For just a moment. Harold noticed. "Charles," he said, "you're not forcing her to be homeless. You're forcing her to live within her actual means." "What are her actual means?" I asked. "She has a part-time job at an art gallery. $23,000 per year. Daniel works at a marketing firm. $38,000 per year." "That's it?" "That is what they've actually earned," Patricia said. "Everything else, the house, the car payments, Daniel's lifestyle, was funded through Wilson family trusts." I signed the eviction notice. Patricia gathered the documents. "It's done. Charles, you are now worth $340 million. Margaret and Daniel have whatever's in their checking accounts." "How much is that?" "Margaret has about $4,000. Daniel has about $1,200. The contrast was staggering. This morning, they'd thought they were inheriting $51 million. Tonight, they had less than $6,000 between them. "What happens next?" I asked. "The bank will freeze all Wilson family trust accounts at midnight," Patricia said. "Margaret's mortgage payments stop. Daniel's car lease payments stop. Credit cards connected to the family accounts are canceled." "When will they realize this?" "Probably when they try to pay for something tomorrow. Or when the bank calls about missed payments next week." Harold stood up, walked to the window. "Charles, there's something else you need to understand. This isn't just about money. You now control one of the most influential foundations in Pennsylvania. You'll be meeting with governors, senators, university presidents. You'll decide which hospitals get funding, which schools get grants. I don't know anything about running a foundation. You'll learn, but more importantly, you understand what Margaret and Daniel never understood. You understand that privilege comes with responsibility, that wealth is a tool for helping others, not just yourself." Patricia closed her briefcase. "There is one more thing. Margaret and Daniel will almost certainly try to contact you. They'll want to apologize, to reconcile, to find a way back into the family. And Harold's instructions are very clear. Any attempt to restore their inheritance requires unanimous approval from the foundation board. All 12 members would have to agree that they've genuinely changed. What are the chances of that? After what 500 people witnessed tonight? 0. Harold turned from the window. Charles, I want you to understand something. What happened tonight wasn't revenge. It was consequences. Margaret and Daniel chose to abandon you when they thought no one important was watching. They chose to humiliate you publicly. They chose to cut you out of their lives permanently. I know. All I did was give them exactly what they asked for. They said you weren't family. I made it official. They said you brought nothing to the table. I gave the table to you. Patricia stood up. Charles, there's a car waiting downstairs. First-class flight to Pittsburgh tomorrow morning. The Wilson family jet is at your disposal whenever you need it. The Wilson family jet, a Gulfstream G650, seats 14 people, valued at $70 million. This morning I'd been calculating whether I could afford a coach ticket home. What about Margaret and Daniel? I asked. What about them? Harold said. They made their choice. They chose pride over family, status over love. They chose to see you as worthless. And now? Now they get to live with that choice, permanently. I looked out the window at Paris. Beautiful city, amazing architecture, the kind of place I'd never thought I'd be able to afford to visit. Now I could buy a house here if I wanted. Harold, I said, what if they really change? What if they realize what they've lost and become different people? Harold smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. Charles, he said, some lessons can only be learned the hard way, and some prices can never be paid back. The documents were signed. The money was transferred. The power had shifted completely. Justice was served. The consequences started immediately. And they were devastating. Margaret found out first. Sunday morning, 8:47 a.m., she tried to pay for breakfast at the hotel restaurant with her Wilson family credit card. Declined. She tried her backup card, also connected to the Wilson Trust. Declined. The restaurant manager was polite but firm. Madam, perhaps there is another method of payment? Margaret used her personal credit card, the one with a $4,000 limit that she rarely touched because she never needed it. Daniel discovered the change when he tried to Uber to the airport. His premium account linked to the family trust had been suspended. By the time their flight landed in Pittsburgh, both of their phones were buzzing with automated messages. Your mortgage payment of $4,847 has been declined. Your vehicle lease payment of $890 has been declined. Your American Express account has been suspended due to non-payment. Margaret called me Sunday evening. I was in my new office at Wilson Steel Industries, 47th floor. Corner office with views of the entire city. Charles, she said. Her voice was different, smaller. We need to talk. About what? About what happened last night. About the misunderstanding. What misunderstanding? Harold doesn't understand the context of our conversations. He doesn't understand that families sometimes say things they don't mean when they're stressed. You seem pretty clear about what you meant. Charles, please, can we meet? Can we talk about this like adults? I thought you said we weren't family anymore. Why would I meet with someone who isn't family? She was quiet for a long moment. How much trouble are we in? She asked finally. I don't know what you mean. Financially. How much trouble are we in financially? That depends on how much money you've saved from your jobs. Our jobs? Margaret, you make $23,000 a year at the art gallery. Daniel makes $38,000 at the marketing firm. You'll be living on that. Charles, that's not... We can't live on that. The house payment alone is almost $5,000 a month. Then you'll need to find a different house. A different house? Her voice was getting higher. Charles, I've lived in this house for 8 years. All my friends are in this neighborhood. Daniel grew up here. You'll need to find something you can afford on your actual income. Which is what? I did the quick math. Together, about $61,000 a year, before taxes. You're looking at maybe $4,000 a month take home. $4,000 a month? She sounded like I'd told her she had a terminal illness. Charles, that's poverty. No, Margaret, that's what most Americans live on. You just never had to learn how. Monday morning brought more consequences. Margaret's Mercedes was repossessed from the art gallery parking lot. In front of her coworkers, in front of customers. Daniel's BMW was taken from his apartment complex. The tow truck driver was polite, but efficient. By Monday afternoon, Margaret's neighbors had started talking. Word travels fast in expensive neighborhoods when someone can't make their mortgage payment. Tuesday, the story hit the Pittsburgh social pages. Not the front page, but a small item in the society section. Longtime Pittsburgh socialite Margaret Johnson and her son Daniel Johnson were notably absent from this week's charity circuit events following their public disinheritance at the Wilson Foundation Gala in Paris. Wednesday, Margaret's friends started avoiding her calls. Thursday, Daniel's girlfriend broke up with him, via text message. "I can't be with someone whose family situation is this unstable. Sorry." Friday, Margaret called me again. "Charles," she said, "people are talking. Everyone knows what happened. No one will return my calls." "I'm sorry to hear that." Are you really sorry, or is this what you wanted?" "I didn't want anything, Margaret. I just wanted to be treated like family. We made mistakes. We said things we shouldn't have said. But this is destroying our lives. You destroyed your own lives. You chose to abandon me. You chose to humiliate me publicly. You chose to cut me out of your family permanently." "But we didn't mean—" "You meant every word, and you made sure everyone heard it." The next week, Margaret's house went into foreclosure. The eviction notice was served publicly, as required by law. Her neighbors saw the sheriff's deputy posting the notice on her front door. Daniel had to move back in with Margaret. Into the house they were about to lose. They found a 2-bedroom apartment in a different part of town. $1,500 a month, half their combined take-home income. Margaret sold her jewelry to pay the security deposit. By the end of the month, Margaret Johnson had gone from Pittsburgh socialite to struggling single mother trying to figure out how to live on a budget she'd never imagined. Daniel Johnson had gone from trust fund kid to entry-level marketing employee, wondering how he'd ever afford the life he thought he deserved. And Charles Wilson had gone from family disappointment to foundation chairman controlling $15 million in annual charitable giving. The power reversal was complete, and it was permanent. 6 months later, Margaret called one final time. "Charles," she said, "I want you to know that I understand now. What we did was wrong, unforgivable." I was in my home office. The 15-bedroom estate Harold had left me. I was reviewing grant applications for the Wilson Foundation. A children's hospital in Pittsburgh needed $2 million for new equipment. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "Daniel wants to apologize too. He's different now. Working 40 hours a week, paying his own bills. He understands what real life is like." "That's good. Charles, is there any chance, any possibility that we could earn our way back into the family? The foundation board would have to approve any change to the inheritance, all 12 members unanimously. Would you support that, if we proved we'd changed?" I thought about that question for a long time, about forgiveness, about second chances, about what family really means. "Margaret," I said finally, "you spent 3 years teaching me that family love should be conditional, that people only deserve relationships if they bring something valuable to the table. We were wrong. Maybe, but those were your rules. You chose them. You enforced them. You made them very clear. And now you get to live by them." She was quiet for a moment. "So there's no way back?" "There's no way back to what we had before," I said. "Because what we had before was you pretending to tolerate me while planning to discard me. What about going forward? What about building something new?" "Margaret, you abandoned your family member when he needed help. That's not something you recover from. That's something you live with." "Forever?" "Forever." I hung up and returned to the grant applications. The Children's Hospital would get their funding, so would the literacy program, and the homeless shelter, $15 million a year to help people who actually needed help. People who understood that family doesn't abandon family, that love isn't conditional on status, that character matters more than wealth. True family reveals itself not in prosperity, but in adversity. Margaret and Daniel failed that test. They chose pride over loyalty, status over love. Some choices can't be undone. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from.